forward. When we joined the European Union in the early 70s, at that stage it was just a trading union of nine countries, but it's grown since then. It's now 27 members in the Union, and it's operated on the basis of various treaties. Treaties like the initial Treaty of Rome, then Maastricht, Amsterdam and Nice, and they all were brought in to try to improve the operation of the ever-expanding Union, and so it is with Lisbon. It's really just a treaty to enable us to make sure that we've got good day-to-day management within the Union structure. The treaty itself consists of two sets of amendments. The first set of amendments is to amend the Treaty of Maastricht. The second set of amendments is to amend the original Treaty of Rome itself. And I think it can be summarised into 5 key areas. The first is that we see the inclusion of a statement on what the values of the European Union are, what its objectives are. The second is we've got the inclusion of a Charter of Fundamental Rights. Thirdly, we've got additional improvements in how democracy operates within the Union. Fourthly, and for the first time, we see provision in relation to global issues like climate change, like humanitarian aid. And we've also got the inclusion of the common foreign and security policy. I suppose the area that's probably causing most debate on the whole issue of the treaty. And just going through them in turn. Firstly, one of the objectives of European Union reform is to set out in writing exactly what the nature and goals of the European Union are as we enter the 21st century. It defines the values are respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality and human rights. And the objectives as being there to promote peace, improve humanitarian aid throughout the world, and for the first time there's an objective to aim for full employment across the Union. And in relation to achieving those objectives, it sets out clear limits to what the European Union can do. It can only act in areas where the member states in the Union have conferred competences to. It can't do anything that a member state can do itself, and it can only act to such a degree to achieve the objectives and do nothing more, what's known as proportionality. Secondly, the treaty puts in writing and includes the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and there are a number of strands to this charter. The human dignity, so it sets out things such as the prohibition of torture, the right to life, essential freedoms, freedom of liberty, freedom of expression of thought, of movement and of assembly. It provides for complete equality across genders, across age groups, across religions and across people of different physical abilities. It's got clauses in relation to fairness and solidarity, workers' rights and the like. It's got citizens' rights in there, so it shrines in the Charter the right to stand in elections, the right to run in elections, the right to vote, and the right to obtain information from European bodies. And then there's a strand in relation to justice, making sure that people have got a fair trial, the right to presumed innocence. So the treaty gives legal binding status to these rights. It means that the European Union cannot come along and introduce legislation without making absolutely sure that that charter and those rights are adhered to. The third thing is that the treaty does, it increases democracy across the Union. And I'll give some specific examples of how it does that. It sets up a citizens' charter whereby if 1 million citizens get together and petition the Union, they can ask the Commission to introduce a new piece of legislation. Secondly, it increases transparency and accountability throughout the Union. When the Council of Ministers is meeting to discuss and decide on legislation, those meetings now have to be open to the public, so it makes the whole process of legislation a lot more transparent. Thirdly, national parliaments now have a greater role in how laws are enacted. All draft legislation from the Union has to go before national parliaments, and including our own. If we don't like some parts of it, then we can hold up a yellow card saying, we don't like this, go away, think again. And after the Union thinks again, if they come back and a majority of Parliament still don't like it, then they can actually kick out that proposed legislation. But as well as those things, the treaty fundamentally shifts power away from the Commission towards not just national parliaments, but towards the European Parliament as well. There's other things in there as well in relation to trying to deal with the increased size of the Union, and things such as changes to the voting process. Historically, in Europe, most legislation is adopted by consensus. 80% of new legislation is by consensus, unlike national parliaments, which are a bit more divisive. So only 1 out of every 5 times decisions have come to a vote in the past. And generally speaking, on those occasions, Ireland actually happens to be on the right side, on the winning side of the vote. We're introducing more qualified majority voting now after if the treaty is improved. And qualified majority voting is really 2 strands to it. It says, firstly, you have to make sure that at least 65% of member states by population, that's states representing over 300 million. Firstly, they have to be in favour of the legislation. Secondly, a majority of the member states have to approve. You need 15 of the 27 states to sign up to a new piece of legislation. So, for instance, if the top 6 countries in terms of population, Italy, United Kingdom, Spain, France, and Poland and Germany, if they got together, they represent 70% of the Union's population, but they can't force through legislation unless they get 15 member states to sign up to it. So it prevents the largest countries having their way and ignoring the wishes of smaller countries. But also, it means that the 15 smallest countries like ourselves, Malta and others, 15 smallest countries only make up 13% of the population. It prevents them trying to force something through without making sure that the largest countries also, the needs and wishes of their population are taken into account. So in that way, it makes sure that it's a more democratic process for the adoption of new legislation. We've also seen some discussion about the fact that as a country we'll have a commissioner now for 10 years out of the 15 rather than 15 years out of the 15. Well, in actual fact, if you look at the figures, the UK will also only have a commissioner for 10 years out of 15, although they got 15 times the population that we have. So relatively speaking, we're actually quite represented per head for commissioners. And so it's the same too with the members of the European Parliament. Our numbers post-treaty will be 12. That represents 1 member of Parliament for every 400,000 people. The Germans will have 1 member of Parliament for every 800,000 people. So once again, we're well looked after on a per capita basis. The next area where I'd like to spend some time is in relation to how the treaty includes new provisions in relation to global issues. For instance, in relation to climate change. It sets down on a specific legal basis that the Union will promote international action on climate change. It also includes an energy policy, and part of the policy will look at things such as promoting energy efficiency and also promoting renewable energy. And the treaty also, for the first time, introduces a specific legal basis for humanitarian aid, and it sets up a European Voluntary Humanitarian Aid Corps. So from now on, a clear basis and objective of our development policy worldwide will be for the reduction and eventual eradication of poverty across the world. And the 5th area, and probably the area where there has been most debate, is in relation to what's going to happen to how external policies of the Union are brought into being. The treaty contains specific proposals for the common foreign and security policy. But let's be very clear here. Any policy can only be adopted by unanimity across all the 27 member states. There is something called constructive abstention, which allows countries like Ireland to stay away from a decision if we really don't like it. And there's also something called an emergency break, whereby if we don't like a proposal that's coming forward, we can call...
1 minute.
How long?
1 minute.
1 minute. We can call a halt to legislation. It establishes a new post of High Representative for Foreign Affairs, and this person will be responsible for representing the Union overseas and for coordinating the implementation of the agreed common policy. Any decision to get involved in a humanitarian operation or crisis intervention is a so-called Petersburg task, can only be done by unanimity. And we've got our own triple lock process as well, which means we won't go into any overseas aid mission or humanitarian mission unless we've got Dáil approval and Senate approval, government approval and UN approval. The idea that our sons and daughters will be rushing off to war without our say is just complete scaremongering. So if